And here with us now to talk more about the legal ramifications of the new immigration policies is attorney Elliot Felig with Elliot Felig and Associates. Elliot, thanks for being with us.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Elliot, let's start off with the immigration enforcement that the Trump administration is pushing forward. Are there any legal issues with that? That's
going to be much tougher for the attorneys general or for opposing parties to challenge, because in those instances, you're really talking about the enforcement of existing laws that have been on the books for, in some cases, decades, and the constitutionality has never been challenged. So that's quite different from the travel ban, where you're dealing with a new order, a completely new kind of legislation or statute.
And we've just heard that that new order may be delayed by a week. What are your expectations? How do you think this will be redrafted?
Right. Well, if at first you don't succeed, try again. I think the new executive order is going to largely mirror the original existing order, executive order, but with one very notable carve-out. The new order is going to state very specifically in the text of the order that it does not apply to lawful permanent residents, which is another way of saying green card holders, and it also probably won't apply to people who have lawfully already gained visas to allowing them to seek entry to the United States. That carve-out is very specifically designed to meet the concerns expressed by the Ninth Circuit in their decision that upheld the temporary restraining order.
Now, Elliot, the term due process has been very emphasized. How is that going to be fixed? Explain what that means.
Sure. So due process is the constitutional right, and who has due process rights is a matter of heated debate. But it basically says that if you have due process rights, the government cannot take away any sort of freedom or any sort of right without adequate notice and without adequate hearing. And so the argument was made before the Ninth Circuit, and the court was sympathetic, that the president, by taking away the right to enter or re-enter the United States with the mere stroke of a pen, had not provided adequate notice, had not provided an adequate hearing.
Okay, so assuming the due process thing is resolved, and it sounds like they will work on getting that resolved, I suppose the next issue then would be the focus on claims that it is a so-called Muslim ban. Now, there are over 42 Muslim countries that are not included in this ban. So does that claim hold any water then?
Well, of course, you're absolutely right. Once the due process is taken off the table, once that claim is gone, then the focus shifts to whether or not this is a Muslim ban. The argument on one side is, as you allude to, many of the world's largest Muslim countries are not affected by this. On the other hand, the president is going to be hampered potentially in court by the fact that during the campaign he did propose a blanket ban on Muslims, and the opposing parties, the attorneys general, are going to say this is simply a thinly veiled or backhanded way to attempt to do that, and that, they will say, would be unconstitutional.
Now, speaking of constitutional, that brings us to another issue and the Supreme Court. And we're waiting to see how Trump's nominee Gorsuch does. What's the likelihood there?
So the question is, if Gorsuch is confirmed by the time this potential dispute reaches the court, first, would he be able to participate in any vote? And he would be able to, notwithstanding that he's a Trump appointee. He can sit and decide questions of this nature unless he has a personal stake in the outcome, which he surely doesn't. However, I would urge a lot of caution for anyone to assume, oh, because Gorsuch is up there and there's a potentially 5-4 Republican majority, that this is going to be upheld by the court. You can't make that assumption. Supreme Court, particularly Judge Kennedy, very often switches over to the other side of the court, so I wouldn't make any assumptions about it being upheld.
But I am going to ask you to make an assumption. If this travel ban or suspension of travel is released a week from now, what do you anticipate happening?
Immediately, it will be challenged in court by the exact same parties, by the same attorneys general, by the same various interest groups. Those who say that the original executive order was unconstitutional are not going to hold back at all. They'll be right back in court making many of the same claims, except for that one due process claim, which may be off the table.
So you think that it won't be able to be enforced or enacted?
Well, that's a tougher question, because with this was the hook that the Ninth Circuit used to uphold the temporary restraining order. That hook is gone now. These are probably tougher calls. So I can't say with confidence either way whether it will be upheld, whether there'll be a restraining order put in place, or whether it'll be allowed to go into effect.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your insight and analysis. Elliot Felig of Elliot Felig and Associates. Thanks for being here with us.